Elon Musk, Chapter 8, Penn, Philadelphia, 1992 to 1994. Physics. Musk got bored at Queens. It was beautiful, but not academically challenging. So when one of his classmates transferred to the University of Pennsylvania, he decided to see if he could do it as well. Money was a problem. His father was providing no support, and his mother was juggling three jobs to make ends meet. But Penn offered him a $14,000 scholarship, plus a student loan package. So in 1992, he transferred there for his junior year. He decided to major in physics because, like his father, he was drawn to engineering. The essence of being an engineer, he felt, was to address any problem by drilling down to the most fundamental tenets of physics. He also decided to pursue a joint degree in business. I was concerned that if I didn't study business, I would be forced to work for someone who did. He says, my goal was to engineer products by having a feel for the physics and never have to work for a boss with a business degree. Even though he was neither political nor gregarious, he ran for student assembly. One of his campaign pledges poked fun at those who sought student office in order to polish their resumes. The final promise of his campaign platform was, if this position ever appears on my resume, to stand on my head and eat 50 copies of the offending document in a public place. Fortunately, he lost, which saved him from falling in with the student government types, a world for which he was temporarily unsuited. Instead, he fit comfortably into a crowd of geeks who liked making clever jokes involving scientific forces, playing Dungeons and Dragons, bringing on video games, and writing a computer code. His closest friends in this crowd was Robin Wren, who had won a physics Olympiad in his native China before coming to Penn. He was the only person better than me at physics, Musk said. They became partners in the physics lab, where they studied how the property of various materials change at extreme temperatures. At the end of one of the experiments, Musk took erasers from the ends of the pencils, dropped them into the jar of cold liquid, then smashed them on the floor. He developed an interest in knowing and being able to visualize the properties of materials and alloys at different temperatures. Wren recalls that Musk focused on the three areas that would shape his career, whether he was calibrating the force of gravity or analyzing the properties of materials. He would discuss with Wren how the laws of physics applied to building rockets. He kept talking about making a rocket that would go to Mars, Wren recalls. Of course, I didn't pay much attention because I thought he was fantasizing. Musk also focused on electric cars. He and Wren would grab lunch from one of the food trucks and sit on the campus lawn, where Musk would read academic papers on batteries. California had just passed a requirement mandated that 10% of vehicles by 2003 had to be electric. I want to go make that happen, Musk said. Musk also became convinced that solar power, which in 1994 was just taken off, was the best path towards sustainable energy. His senior paper was titled, The Importance of Being Solar. He was motivated not just by the dangers of climate change, but also by the fact that fossil fuel reserves would start to dwindle. Society will soon have no option but to focus on renewable power as sources, he wrote. His final page showed a power station of the future involving a satellite with mirrors that would concentrate sunlight into solar panels and send the resulting electricity back to Earth via a microwave beam. The professor gave him a grade of 98, saying it was a very interesting, well-written paper, except the last figure that comes out of the blue. Party animal. Throughout his life, Musk had three ways of escaping the emotional drama that he tended to generate. The first was what he shared with Navid Fork at Queens, an ability to zone out on empire building strategy games, such as Civilization and Flotopia. Robin Wren reflected another facet of Musk, the encyclopedia reader who liked to immerse himself in, as the Hitchhiker's Guide put it, life, the universe, and everything. As at Penn, he developed a third model of relaxation, a taste for partying. that drew him out of the lonely shell that had surrounded him as a kid. His partner and enabler was a fun-loving social animal named Adele Ricci, a tall guy with a big head, laugh, and personality. Ricci was an Italian-American from Manhattan who loved nightclubs. An offbeat character, he started an environmental newspaper called Green Times and attempted to create his own major called Revolution, with copies of the newspaper as his senior thesis. Like Musk, Resi was a transfer student, so they were put in the freshman dorm, where there were rules against parties and visitors after 10 p.m. Neither of them liked following rules, so they rented a house in a sketchy part of West Philadelphia. Resi came up with a scheme to throw big monthly parties. They covered the windows and decorated the house with black lights and fluorescent posters. At one point, Musk discovered that his desk had been painted in Landrin glow-in-the-dark colors and nailed to the wall by Resi, who called it an art installation. Musk took it down and declared that no, it was a desk. At a junkyard, they found a metal sculpture of a horse's head and put a red light inside so beams darted out of his eyes. There was a band on one floor, a DJ on another, tables with beer and jello shots, and someone at the door to collect the $5 entrance fee. On some nights, they would draw 500 people, which would easily pay the rent for a month. When May visited, she was appalled. I filled 8 garbage bags and swept the place. I thought they would be grateful, she says, but they didn't even notice. At the party that night, they stationed her in Elon's bedroom near the front door to check coats and guard the money. She kept a pair of scissors in her hand, which she thought she could use on anyone who tried to steal the cash box. And she moved Elon's mattress next to one of the exterior walls. The house was shaking and bouncing so much that from the music that I thought the ceiling might collapse. So I figured if I was at the edge, I'd be safer. Although Elon loved the vibe of the parties, he never got fully immersed in them. I was stone cold sober at the time, he says. Aldo would get wasted. I'd be banging on his door and say, like, dude, you've got to come up and manage the party. I ended up being the one who had to keep an eye on things. Resi later marveled that Musk usually seemed a bit detached. He enjoyed being around a party, but not fully in it. The only thing he binged on was video games. Despite all of the partying, he understood that Musk was fundamentally alienated and withdrawn, like an observer from a different planet, trying to learn the motions of sociability. I wish Elon knew how to be a little happier, he says. Chapter 9, Go West, Silicon Valley, 1994 to 1994. 5. Summer intern. In Ivy League schools in the 1990s, ambitious students were tugged either east toward the gilded realms of Wall Street banking or west toward the tech utopianism and entrepreneur zeal of Silicon Valley. At Penn, Musk received some internship offers from Wall Street, all lucrative, but finances did not interest him. He felt that bankers and lawyers did not contribute much to society. Besides, he disliked the students he met in business classes. Instead, he was drawn to Silicon Valley. It was the decade of rational exuberance, which one could just slap .com onto in any fantasy and wait for the thunder of Porsches to descend from Sand Hill Road with venture capitalists waving checks. He got his opportunity in the summer of 1994 between his junior and senior year at Penn, when he scored 2 internships that allowed him to indulge his passions for electric vehicles, space, and video games. By day, he worked at Pinnacle Research Institute, a 20-person group that had modest Defense Department contracts to study a supercomputer developed by its founder. A capacitor is a device that can briefly hold an electric charge and discharge it quickly. And Pinnacle thought it would make one that was powerful enough to provide energy for electric cars and space-based weapons. In a paper he wrote at the end of the summer, Musk declared it is so important to note that ultracapacitor is not simply an incremental improvement, but a radically new technology. In the evening, he worked at a small Palo Alto company called Rocket Science, which made video games. When he showed up at their building one night and asked for a job, they gave him a problem they hadn't been able to solve: how to coax a computer to multitask by reading graphics that were stored on a CD-ROM while simultaneously moving an avatar on the screen. He went on internet message boards to ask about other hackers how to bypass the BIOS and joystick reading using DOS. None of the senior engineers had been able to solve this problem, and I solved it in 2 weeks. He says they were impressed and wanted him to work full time, but he needed to graduate in order to get a U.S. work visa. In addition, he came to a realization. He had a fanatic love of video games and the skills to make money creating them, but that was not the best way to spend his life. I wanted to have more impact, he says. King of the road. One unfortunate trend in the 1980s was the cars and computers became tightly sealed appliances. It was possible to open up and fiddle with the innards of the Apple II that the Steve Wozniak designed in the late 1970s. But you couldn't do that with the Macintosh, which Steve Jobs in 1984 made almost impossible to open. Similarly, kids in the 1970s and earlier grew up rummaging under the hoods of cars, tinkering with the carburetors, changing spark plugs, and scoping up the engines. They had a fire-tipped feel for valves involving a Volvo line. This hands-on imperative in the health kit mindset even applied to radios and television sets. If you wanted, you could change the tubes and later the transistors and have a feel for how a circuit board worked. This trend toward closed and sealed devices meant that most techies who came out of age at the 1990s gravitated to software more than hardware. They never knew the sweet smell of smoldering iron, but they could code in ways that made circuits sing. Musk was different. He liked hardware as well as software. He could code, but he also had a feel for physical components, such as battery cells and capacitors, valves and combustion chambers, fuel pumps, and fan belts. In particular, Musk loved fiddling with cars. At the time, he opened a 20-year BMW 300i and spent Saturdays rummaging around junkyards in Philadelphia to score the parts he needed to soup it up. It had a 4-speed transmission, but he decided to upgrade it with a BMW. Started making a 5-speed. Borrowing the lift at a local repair shop, he was able, with a couple of shims and a little bit of grinding, to jam a 5-speed transmission into what had been a 4-speed car. It was really able to haul ass, he recalls. He and Kimball drove that car from Palo Alto back to Philadelphia at the end of the summer of internships in 1994. We both were like, university sucks, but there's no hurry to get back, Kimball recalls. So we did a 3-week road trip. The car broke down repeatedly. On one occasion, we were able to get it to a dealership in Colorado Springs, but after the repairs, it failed again. So they pushed it to a truck stop where Elon successfully reworked everything the professional mechanic had done. Musk also took the BMW on a trip with his college girlfriend at the time, Jennifer Dwynn. Over Christmas break in 1994, they drove from Philadelphia to Queen's University, where Kimball was still studying, and then to Toronto to see his mother, where he gave Jennifer a small gold necklace with its smooth green emerald. His mom had a number of these necklaces in her case in her bedroom, and Elon told me that they were from his father's emerald mine in South Africa. He pulled one from the case. Jennifer noted 25 years later when she auctioned it online. In fact, the long bankrupt mine had not been in South Africa and was not owned by his father, but at the time, Musk didn't mind giving that impression. When he graduated in the spring of 1995, Musk decided to take another cross-country trip to Silicon Valley. He brought along Robin Wren after teaching him how to drive a stick shift. They stopped at the just-opened Denver airport because Musk wanted to see the baggage-handled system. He was fascinated by how they designed the robotic machines to handle the luggage without human intervention, Wren says. But the system was a mess. Musk took away a lesson he would have to relearn when he built highly robotic Tesla factories. It was over automated and they underestimated the complexity of what they were building, he says. The internet wave. Musk planned to enroll at Stanford at the end of the summer to study material science as a graduate student. Still fascinated by capacitors, he wanted to research how they might power electric cars. And the idea was to leverage advanced chip making equipment to make a solid state ultracapacitor with enough energy density to give a car long range, he says. But as he got closer to enrolling, he began to worry. I figured I would spend several years at Stanford, get a PhD, and my conclusion on capacitors would be that they aren't feasible, he says. Most PhDs are irrelevant. The number that actually moved the needle is almost none. He had conceived by then a life vision that he would repeat like a mantra. I thought about the things that would truly affect humanity, he says. I came up with 3: the internet, sustainable energy, and space travel. In the summer of 1995, it became clear to him that the first of these, the internet, was not going to wait for him to finish graduate school. The web had just opened up for commercial use, and that August the browser startup Netscape went public, soaring within a day to a market value of $2.9 billion. Musk had come up with an idea for an internet company during his final year at Penn. When an executive from NYNXE came to speak about the phone company's plans to launch an online version of the Yellow Pages dubbed Big Yellow. It would be interactive features so that users could tailor the information to their personal needs. The executive said Musk thought correctly, as it turned out, that NYNEX had no clue how to make it truly interactive. Why don't we do it ourselves, he suggested to Kimball, and he began writing a code that would combine business listings with map data. They dubbed it the Virtual City Navigator. Just before the enrollment deadline for Stanford, Musk went to Toronto to get advice from Peter Nicholson of Scotiabank. Should he pursue the ideal for Virtual City Navigator, or should he start the PhD program? Nicholson had a PhD from Stanford, did not equivocate. The internet revolution only comes once in a lifetime, so strike while the iron is hot, he told Musk as they walked along the shore of Lake Ontario. You will have lots of time to go to graduate school later if you're still interested. When Musk got back to Palo Alto, he told Wren he had made up his mind. I need to put everything else on hold, he said. I need to catch the internet wave. He actually hedged his bets. He officially enrolled at Stanford and then immediately requested a deferral. I've written some software with the first internet maps and Yellow Pages directory, he told Bill Nix, the material science professor. I will probably fail, and if so, I would like to come back. Nick said it would not be a problem for Musk to defer his studies, but he predicted that he would never come back. Chapter 10, Zip 2, Palo Alto, 1995 to 1999. Map quests. Some of the best inventions came from combining 2 previous inventions. The idea that Elon and Kimball had in early 1995, just as the web was starting to grow exponentially, are simple. Put a search-able directory of business online and combine it with map software that would give users directions to them. Now everyone saw the potential when Kimball had a meeting at the Toronto Star, which published Yellow Pages in the city. The president picked up a thick edition of the directory and threw it at him. Do you honestly think you're ever going to replace this? He asked. The brothers rented a tiny office in Palo Alto that had a room for 2 desks and futons. For the first 6 months, they slept in the office and showered at the YMCA. Kimball would later become a chef and restaurateur, got an electric coil, and cooked meals occasionally. But mainly they ate at Jack in the Box because it was cheap, open 24 hours, and just a block away. I can still tell you every single menu item, Kimball says. It just seared into my brain. Elon became a fan of the teriyaki bowl. After a few months, they rented an unfurnished apartment that stayed that way. All it had was 2 mattresses and lots of Cocoa Puffs boxes, says Tosca. Even after they moved in, Elon spent many nights in the office crashing under his desk when he was exhausted from coding. He had no pillow, he had no sleeping bag. I don't know how he did it, says Jim Ambrose, an early employee. Once in a while, if we had a customer meeting in the morning, I'd have to tell him to go home and shower. The Vide Fort came from Toronto to work with him, but he had soon found himself in fights with Musk. If you want your friendship to last, his wife Naeem told him, this is not for you. So he quit about after 6 weeks. I knew that I could either be working with him or be his friend, but not both. And the latter seemed more enjoyable. Elon Musk, not yet estranged from his sons, visited from the South Africa and gave them 28,000 plus a beat-up car he bought for 500. Their mother May came from Toronto more often, bringing food and clothes. She gave them $10,000 and let them use her credit card because they had not been approved for one. They got their first break when they visited Nevatek, which had a database of maps. The company agreed to license it to the Musks for free until they started making a profit. Elon wrote a program that merged the maps with a listing of businesses in the area. You could use your own cursor and zoom in and around the map, says Kimball. That stuff is totally normal today, but it was mind-blowing to see at that time. I think Elon and I were the first humans to see it work on the internet. They named the company Zip2, as in zip to where you want to go. Elon was granted a patent for the interactive network directory service that he had created. The invention provides a network accessibility service which integrates both a business directory and a map database, the patent stated. For their first meeting with potential investors, they had to take a bus up Sand Hill Road because the car their dad had given them broke down. But after word spread about the company, the VCs were asking to come to them. They bought a big frame for a computer rack and put one of the small computers inside so that visitors would think they had a giant server. They named it the machine that goes ping after a Monty Python sketch. Every time investors would come in and we showed them the tower, Kimball says, and we would laugh because it made them think we were doing hardcore stuff. May flew from Toronto to help prepare for the meetings with venture capitalists, often staying up all night at Kinko's to print the presentations. It was $1 a page for color, which we could barely afford, she says. We would all be exhausted except Elon. He was always up late doing the coding. When they got their first proposals from potential investors in early 1996, May took her boys to a nice restaurant to celebrate. That's the last time we'll have to use my credit card, she said when she paid the bill. And it was. They were soon astounded by an offer from Moat Dividend Ventures to invest $3 million in the company. The final presentation to the firm was scheduled for a Monday, and that weekend Kimball decided to make a quick trip to Toronto to fix their mother's computer, which had broken. We love our mom, he explains. As he was leaving on Sunday to fly back to San Francisco, he got stopped by U.S. border officials at the airport who looked in his luggage and saw the pitch deck, business cards, and other documents for the company. Because he did not have a U.S. work visa, they wouldn't let him board the plane. He had a friend pick him up at the airport and drive him across the border, where he told a less vigilant border officer that they were headed down to see the Dave Letterman show. He managed to catch the late plane from Buffalo to San Francisco and made it in time for the pitch. Moore DeVito loved the presentation and finalized the investment. The firm also found an immigration lawyer to help the two Musks get work visas and gave them each $30,000 to purchase cars. Elon bought a 1967 Jaguar E-Type. As a kid in South Africa, he had seen a picture of the car in the book, or the best convertibles ever made. And he had vowed to buy one if he ever struck it rich. It was the most beautiful car you could imagine, he says, but it broke down at least once a week. The venture capitalists soon did what they often do, bring in an adult supervision to take over from the young founders. It had happened to Steve Jobs at Apple and to Larry Page and Sergey Brin at Google. Ryan Sorkin, who had run a business development for an audio equipment company, who was made the CEO of Zip2. Elon was moved aside to Chief Technology Officer. At first, he thought the change would suit him. He would focus on building the product. But he learned a lesson. I never want to be a CEO, he says, but I learned that you could not truly be the Chief Technology or product officer unless you were the CEO. With the changes came a new strategy. Instead of marketing its product directly to businesses and their customers, Zip2 focused on selling its software to big newspapers so they could make their own local directories. This made sense. Newspapers already had sales forces that were knocking on the doors businesses to sell them advertising and classifieds. Knight Ridder, the New York Times, Politicizers, and Hearst newspaper signed up. Executives from First Two joined the Zip2 board. Editor and publisher magazine ran a cover story titled Newspapers Domes. New superhero Zip2 reporting that the company had created a new suite of software structures that would enable individual newspapers to quickly mount large-scale city guide type directories. By 1997, Zip2 had been hired by 140 newspapers at licensing fees ranging from 1,000 to 10,000. The president of the Toronto Star, who had thrown a Yellow Pages book at Kimball, called him to apologize and asked if Zip2 would be its partner. Kimball said yes. Hardcore. From the very beginning of his career, Musk was a demanding manager, contemptuous of the concept of work-life balance. At Zip2 and every subsequent company, he drove himself relentlessly all day and through much of the night, without vacations, and he expected others to do the same. His only indulgence was allowing breaks for intense video game binges. The Zip2 team won second place in a national Quake competition. They would have come in first, he says, but one of them crashed his computer by pushing it too hard. While the other engineers went home, Musk would sometimes take the code they were working on and rewrite it. With his weak empathy gene, he didn't realize or care that correcting someone publicly, or as he put it, fixing their fucking stupid code, was not a path to endearment. He had never been a captain of a sports team or the leader of a gang of friends, and he lacked an instinct for camaraderie. Like Steve Jobs, he generally did not care if he offended or intimidated the people he worked with, as long as he drove them to accomplish feats they thought were impossible. It's not your job to make people on your team love you, he said at a SpaceX executive session years later. In fact, that's the counterproductive. He was toughest on Kimball. I love my brother very much, but working with him was hard, Kimball says. Their disagreement often led to rolling on the office floor fights. They fought over major strategy, minor sites in the name Zip2. Kimball and a marketing firm came up with it. Elon hated it. Growing up in South Africa, fighting was normal, Elon says. It was part of the culture. They had no private officers, just cubicles, so everyone had to watch. In one of their worst fights, they wrestled to the floor, and Elon seemed ready to punch Kimball in the face. So Kimball bit his hand and tore off a hunk of flesh. Elon had to go to the emergency room for stitches and tendonitis a shot. When we had intense stress, we just didn't notice anyone else around us, says Kimball. He later admitted that Elon was right about Zip2. It was a shitty name. True product people had a compulsion to sell directly to consumers, without middlemen muddying things up. Musk was that way. He became frustrated by Zip2's strategy of regulating itself to being an underbranded vendor to the newspaper industry. We wound up beholden to the papers, Musk says. He wanted to buy the domain name city.com and become a consumer destination again, competing with Yahoo and AOL. And the investors were also having second thoughts about their strategy. City guides and internet directories were proliferating by the fall of 1998, and none shown a profit. So CEO Rich Sorkin decided to merge with one of them. City searched in the hope that together they would succeed, but when Musk met with the CEO of City Search, the man made him uneasy. With the help of Kimball and some of the other engineers, Elon led a rebellion that scuttled the merger. He also demanded that he be made CEO again. Instead, the board removed him as chair and diminished his role. Great things will never happen with VCs as professional managers, Musk told Inc. magazine. They don't have the creativity or the insight. One of the more devoted partners, Derek Pronin, was installed as interim CEO and tasked with selling the company. This is your first company, he told Musk. Let's find and acquire and make some money so you can do your second, third, and fourth company. The Millionaire. In January 1999, less than 4 years after Elon and Kimball launched Zip2, Protean called them into his office and told them that Compaq Computer, which was seeking to juice up its Alta Vista search engine, had offered $307 million in cash. The brothers had split their 12% ownership stake, 60-40. So Elon, at age 27, walked away with $22 million, and Kimball with $15 million. Elon was astonished when the check arrived at his apartment. My bank account went from like $5,000 to $22 million, he says. The Musks gave their father $300,000 out of their proceeds and their mother $1 million. Elon bought an 800 square foot condo and splurged on what for him was the ultimate indulgence, a $1 million McLaren F1 sports car, the fastest production car in existence. He agreed to allow CNN to film him taking delivery. Just 3 years ago, I was showering at the Y and sleeping on the office floor. And now I've got $1 million car, he said as he hopped around in the street. While the car was unloaded from a truck, after the impulsive outburst, he realized that the giddy display of his newfound taste for wealth was unseemly. Some could interpret the purchase of his car as behavior characteristics of an imperialist brat, he admitted. My values may have changed, but I'm not consciously aware of my values having changed. Had they changed? He knew wealth allowed his desires and impulses to be subjected to fewer restraints, which was not always a pretty sight. But his earnest, mission-driven intensity remained intact. The writer Michael Gross was in Silicon Valley reporting a piece for Tina Brown's Glossy Talk magazine on newly rich techno brats. I was looking for an auspicious lead character who might warrant skewering, Gross recalled years later. But the Musk I met in 2000 was bursting with joy de vivre, too likable to skewer. He had the same insouciance and indifference to expectations he does now, but he was easy, open, charming, and funny. Celebrity was enticing for a kid who had grown up with no friends. I'd like to be on the cover of Rolling Stone, he told CNN, but he would end up having a conflict relationship with wealth. I could go and buy one of the islands of the Bahamas and turn it into my personal fiefdom, but I'm much more interested in trying to build and create a new company, he said. I haven't spent all my winnings. I'm going to put almost all of it back to a new game.